Right, good afternoon. So let's make a start. Yeah? I'm here to present on your Sinitic nominalisation, microvariation and dialect leveling. So, 漢語方言名詞化的參數和接觸. Before I begin, I'd like to, place my thanks, to several people. First of all, to the audiences, as at certain previous conferences to which earlier versions of this work were presented. Also, to my supervisors and mentors, to Professor Nigel Vincent, Feng Shenli, George Sulas, Pino Longobardi, Peter Sells, Ian Roberts, and finally to Edith Aldridge for their advice and for their help with helping me with this piece of work. So let's make a start. All right, so first of all, the topic I present today is normalization in Chinese, 漢語嘅名詞化. Normalization is, across linguistically a very big phenomenon that many people have touched on, and as regards to East Asian languages, Funa Yap, she's edited a big volume that deals with normalization in East Asian languages, and I think the terms of adnominalisation is one that's often been used in reference to a Chinese, because in Chinese there are certain morphemes that are called adnominalisers, 結構助詞, that consist of mainly of de and ge. So Mandarin de and Cantonese ge. So the T stem and the G stem morphemes are the ones that have been used for this type of function. And these morphemes have two main functions. First of all, a possession. So similar to English apostrophe s. So for example, in Mandarin, you would say 我的車, 我的車. Okay. The equivalent in Cantonese is 我嘅車, or sometimes you could use the classifier as well, 我架車. The second function is attribution, so the use of adjectives in modifying head nouns. For example, in Mandarin, 棒的女人, the Cantonese equivalent would be 肥嘅女人, against 棒的女人 versus 肥嘅女人. There are these T and G stem morphemes that seems to have these two sort of broad functions. And these different functions have given rise to formal analyses where people like Walter Point has argued that there are different functional heads in the nominal domain in which both de and ge can be merged. There is, despite these broad similarities, there are some differences, some micro variation between de and ge, between Chinese dialects. For example, people like Tang has argued in several papers that de and ge mainly correspond to the northern and southern divide in the Chinese dialect family. So as he says, 南北非時, the north and southern divide or dichotomy between de and ge respectively. And he has accounted for micro variation in two constructions. Namely in the Chinese clefts, where, all right, so we have this cleft construction where the coupler verb takes a complement ending in de or ge. So in Mandarin 是的 or Cantonese 还ge. In northern varieties of Mandarin, it's possible to use de as a verbal suffix denoting a past tense. For example, so 我是昨天买的票. 我是昨天买的票, but de can be so used as a verbal suffix denoting a past tense. The Cantonese equivalent of that is not possible. So we cannot say in Cantonese 佢係琴日買嘅飛. The pan-Sinitic pattern is that both de and ge can be used as a sentence final particle. So in all dialects we could say 他是昨天買票的, 佢係琴日買飛嘅. But the use of de as a verbal suffix is only possible in northern varieties. In Cantonese, however, that's not possible. Another construction in which de and ge differ is the use of de as the head of an activity nominal in subject position. So, for example, in Mandarin, it's possible to say, 他的老师当得好, meaning, he is being a good teacher. 他的老师 here does not denote a real a person, but rather the attribute or the activity of being a teacher. So, 他的老师当得好. In Cantonese, however, that's not possible. So 佢嘅老師做得好 cannot mean, his being a teacher is done well. Ge here would have denote a real person, i.e., the person's a teacher. All right, so there are clearly these are the micro variations between the and ge that the Tang has raised, and that we should be occupied with. Is that ge seems to be more marked than de, and there are constructions where de occurs, but ge is prohibited, as seen in this cleft and activity constructions. All right, so if you look at these two constructions individually, so for example, the VDO versus VGO, a more detailed sort of dialect survey raises doubts as to whether the dichotomy between northern and southern dialects is really as clear cut as Tang and others have led us to believe. So I've done some dialect survey where I've solicited judgment tests from native speakers of various dialects, and for example in Wu dialects, which is sort of a central a dialect, nearly all of my informants tell me that they would permit ge as a verbal suffix. For example, in Shanghainese, I don't speak Shanghainese, so I just have to either say this incorrectly. But for example, 我是昨天买个票 where ge here, is permitted as a verbal suffix. That's similar to the northern pattern. In 苏州话, at least 昨天买个票, similarly. In 长说话, which is perhaps a less known Wu dialect, but to which I also have access to in terms of native judgments. 我是昨天三个片子 similarly. In Xiang dialects, similarly, my only informants of Xiang dialects, namely who speaks Xinhua dialect, he also tells me that he would also use ge in these type of constructions. In fact, this is a famous example. It's cited in Wu Yunji's famous handbook on Xiang dialects, where there is an example here. 我是前天到个北京 denoting past tense. 客家 likewise, my informant for 客家话 also tells me that she'll be willing to use ge. Okay, so 我係尋日買嘅票 also as a past tense suffix. All right, so in these type of intermediate dialects, ge can be used as a verbal suffix. The only dialects that I've discovered that do not permit VGO is namely in the Cantonese and Taiwanese Min, the extreme south varieties, where there's perhaps a higher level of political and social autonomy, such as Hong Kong and Taiwan, where the northern patterns hasn't been as influential as it has been on the central mainland dialects. We've seen the Cantonese example before, but also the Taiwanese Min example, which I've solicited. Again, I don't speak Taiwanese Min, but if I just say this out loud, 我是在台湾出个省 that's not permitted. So I think we can conclude from this dialect and distribution that VGO is permitted, even if it's it's seen as somewhat strange in a sort of central and intermediate mainland dialects of Chinese. Only in Cantonese and Taiwanese Min do we not get VGO at all, but otherwise we do get it. With activity anomalous, however, the distribution is a bit different. And that in all the dialects, for example, the ones that I've shown you on the previous slide, is that they do not permit ge in activity nominals in subject a position. So for example, you know, in Wu again, in Shanghainese, 我嘅位車嘅咩個？我嘅位車啦。That's not permitted. Suzhou likewise 你嘅水有的咩個？常说话 likewise 我嘅饭吃的咩個？新华dialect, so in Xiang, you know, my informant tells me that, you know, he would be reluctantly willing to say examples like this. 我嘅篮球打得咩好？我嘅篮球打得咩好？ is that, you know, he is much less happy with this example than with the VGO example on the previous slide. But, you know, he tells me that he will be just about willing to say this, but, you know, he would definitely deem this as being very marked, very, you know, strange, as not natural at all. 客家话 similarly, you know, my informant tells me that, you know, she would never say 我嘅酒喝个好开心，我嘅酒 that's not possible. And you needless to say that, you know, in Cantonese and in Taiwanese men, you know, these two examples are not permitted at all. So, 佢嘅老師做得好, as Tang said, and also in Taiwanese men, 一個籃球打得真好，一個籃球打得真好 meaning, you know, his playing basketball. So not his basketball, not his ball, but his playing basketball. That's also not permitted. So, you know, in contrast to VGO, you know, the use of ge in activity nominals in subject position is much less common. In fact, you know, I've only found, you know, two examples in a paper by Yang where, you know, he has consulted native speakers of these two, you know, somewhat obscure dialects, is Dongko, Lao Xiangyu, and also in Gan 方言的吉安话。 Where he cites these examples, 七个老师拿的咩好，七个篮球打的咩好，七个棋下的咩好 ，etc. 佢嘅老師打的咩好，佢嘅籃球打的咩好，佢嘅棋做的咩好 ，etc. But I think we can conclude that, you know, with the exception, with possibly the exception of very few dialects, you know, VGO. In denoting, G in denoting activity nominals in subject position is not permitted. So that's a contrast to a VGO in clefts that we saw on the previous slide. Right, so, you know, if we compare, you know, these two constructions, we've seen that, you know, VGO is, you know, generally permitted, even if, you know, it's not totally natural, whereas, you know, the use of G in activity nominals and subject position is absolutely not permitted in most dialects. So, you know, we seem to form, you know, some sort of isogloss in the dialects that we've seen on the previous slides, and that you know, there are these sort of central intermediate mainland dialects, namely Wu and Xiang, Kejia, etc., where there's this intermediary pattern where VGO is permitted, but, you know, but the use of ge in activity nominals is not. And so, you know, we can form an intermediary level in the normalization of Chinese varieties, and that's all right. I've taken, you know, the slot from, you know, the famous the famous dialect a manual edited by Tao, the 汉语方言地图集. And then, you know, we've seen that, you know, the red dots there represent dialects that have G forms, these are ge forms as possessive particles, whereas the ones that have empty circles in them, you know, those are the ones that use de. So the broad distribution is, you know, northern versus southern, roughly, where de is used in the northern dialect areas, whereas ge is used in the southern ones, including Taiwan. In the middle, you can see, you know, I mean, there are some sort of, you know, green dots there. That's sort of in intermediate dialects where both de and ge are used in some sort of mixture or in some sort of nominal function sharing. But, you know, between these dialectal areas, I suppose there is some kind of intermediary dialectal isogloss that we can identify. And formally, we could sort of, formalize the data like this. In the northern dialects, so for example, 北方话, 东北话, etc., we get de, and de can be used in past and clefs as well as in activity nominals. In the central areas, we get ge, and here ge seems to be influenced by de, and then ge can be used in pastime clefs. But it doesn't seem to be used in activity nominals in subject position. And finally, in the extreme south areas where there's perhaps a slightly higher level of political and social autonomy, we get the Cantonese and Taiwanese pattern where ge just cannot be used in either construction at all. So we get VGO and koike losi both being ungrammatical here. So I suppose this is the formal property of both de and ge as laid out by Tang in reference to these two constructions. Right, okay, so if we just provide a summary of what I just I further just presented to you, and lay out the roadmap for the rest of my presentation. All right, okay, so Tang has argued that both de and ge that represent northern and southern dialects respectively, they differ with respect to clefs and activity nominals, and ge cannot be used in pastime clefs nor in activity nominals in subject position. And my subsequent dialect survey has shown that there's perhaps an intermediary isogloss where VGO is permitted, but not the use of ge in activity nominals. I suppose there's perhaps another construction where D and G also differ. I mean, this is mentioned in a footnote in Xiu's Joanna Xiu's chapter in Feng He Yap's edited volume on East Asian languages nominalisation. So, for example, the use of de and ge in this three-place ditransitive verbs. Expressing beneficiary frequency and duration phrases, etc. For example, in Mandarin, it's possible to say that, 我绑他的架. We could omit de here, 我绑他架, meaning I kidnap her, but we can also use de here, 我绑他的架, where ta is the beneficiary, or shall I say maleficiary of the act of kidnapping. I kidnap her, 他的架. Similarly, with frequency phrases, it's possible to annotate, 我踢了2次的球, 我踢了2次球, or 2次的球. The here is omissible, but it can also be used. 我游了3个小时的泳, 我游了3个小时泳, 我游了3个小时的泳. Okay, we can use the or not use it in this on these types of frequency or duration of phrases. The equivalent in Cantonese, however, is not possible. So 我綁佢架, I kidnap her. 我綁佢嘅架, 佢嘅架. That's highly marked. In fact, for me as a native speaker, I would say that's ungrammatical. But there may be some people who would reluctantly accept it. But 我綁佢嘅架 is very bad for me. Similarly, 我踢咗2次波, that's perfectly fine. But if I would say 我踢咗2次嘅波, 2次嘅波, again, it's not right. 我游咗3個鐘頭嘅水, it's not good. 我游咗3個鐘頭水, that's fine. But 我游咗3個鐘頭嘅水, 3個鐘頭嘅水, again, it's not good. So I suppose that's another construction where de and ge differ. But I'll leave that for further investigation. For today, I would like to focus on the two constructions that Tang has mentioned in his work. All right, so we've seen that it's possible to discover the microvariation in the nominal domain between the Chinese dialects. All right, so adopting the formal analysis provided by Paul, etc., the anomalous are nominal functors. Their distribution calls a bit of attention because numerous people have noted that attributional or modificational markers are relatively low on the nominal spine. That they're below referential elements like possessive, demonstrative, numerals, quantifiers, and classifiers, etc. And that's in line with the cross-linguistic typological distribution of nominal elements. So, for example, there is this schema provided by numerous people. In Chinese, the nominal phrase is cartographically arranged like this. You've got them, then you've got number, then you've got classifier, modifier, and then nouns. So, for example, in Mandarin, you would say, so Zhang San de San and Chomsky de Shu. Okay, so 3 books of Chomsky's of Zhang San's 3 Chomsky books. Zhang San de, so de here denotes possession. Zhang San is the possessor, and then San Ben, that's the quantifier. With number and classifier, etc. And the Chomsky, the shu, that's the attribution or the modification of the lexical noun. And here we clearly see 2 distinct positions where the can be merged. Zhang San, the San, and Chomsky, the shu, where possessor is clearly higher than the modification projection. Ge likewise, Zheng San ge San bun Chomsky ge shu, Chom San ge San bun Chomsky ge shu, where ge denotes possession as well as modification, and possession is clearly higher than modification. Also, the etymology of both de and ge are different. De has been widely attributed to the phrase final nominalizer di, which probably goes back to classical Chinese zhe. So this phrase final nominalizer that's been reanalyzed as a phrase medial particle denoting a modification, possession, etc. Ge, however, all the various G forms probably come from the general classifier ge. Again, this is also very widely established. So in terms of etymology, we see that de and ge are clearly different. If we look at the formal representation as given here, de and ge can be merged, in mod. Here I'm following Ed Rubin's famous dissertation where he argues that there's a distinct node denoting modification in the nominal domain, and where de and ge can be said to be merged. De and ge can also be merged in pos, denoting a possession. Again, here, people like Pino Longobardi and Giusy Silvestri, they've argued that there is a pos node denoting possession in the nominal domain. And here, they've argued that pos is relatively high. So in accordance with the projection principles of thematic arguments in nominal domain, pos is relatively high. And this ties in with the Chinese data that we saw on the previous slide as well. So we have, if we review the Chinese examples again, so for example, in Cantonese, Zheng Sam Ge San Bun Chomsky Ge Shu, there are 2 gears here, and the first gear denotes possession, whereas the second gear denotes attribution or adjectival modification. Zheng Sam Ge San Bun Chomsky Ge Shu. We can also use the classifier, which I pointed out on the first slide. Zheng San Bun Chomsky Ge Shu, where the classifier bun here is singular, individual, count, etc. And here, bun is clearly higher than ge. Zheng San Bun Chomsky Ge Shu. So again, I think there are 2 distinct projections here, namely pos and mod, in which these adnominalisers can be merged. So pos is clearly higher than mod. Right. So if you look at these constructions again individually. Oh, so if you look at your Chinese clefts construction, Chinese clefts construction are widely called shida construction, and the reason being is that it's the coupler sh plus some kind of complement ending with de. As this schema that numerous people have provided have shown, it's coupler and plus you got focus, then background, then de. This is quite similar to the famous it-clefs in English and various Western languages, where similarly it's coupler and plus some kind of relative clause where there's some kind of a bipartition between the focus and the background. I suppose typologically, it could be argued that cleft constructions are basically coupler constructions, where the coupler verb is the main verb, and it selects some kind of clause or complement in which there may be bipartition of focus and background. in relation to the formation of a Chinese clefts, I mean, people again in recent years have looked at how the copular verb 是 selects different types of relative clauses, VOD or VDO, that seem to have given rise to the modern Mandarin constructions. And similarly, we can apply this to G as well, as Li Xiaojun has done. We can look at how G forms of relative clauses are selected by copulars that may also have given rise to cleft constructions in the various southern dialects. So if we look at this, the historical distribution of cleft constructions where 是 selects relative clauses, and there are quite a few examples where both de and ge occurs in the phrase final position. And here, the idea is that these are equational. So the subject of the couplet and the complement are co-referential. Okay, so these are equatives, equative and copular constructions. So for example, and there's a famous example in 祖堂记. Okay, so in the 世云人人既有第一即舍，赠云鸡是人人既有的，用皮干嘛？用皮做什么？and so人人既有第一即舍. Okay, we've got a copular complement selected by copular, but then in the response, 既是人人既有的, the head noun is omitted. And in the omission of the head noun, I suppose the equational reading of this copular construction is weakened, and this can be reanalyzed as a cleft, or as a sentence final particle that anticipates the modern Chinese form of conditionals, 的话，既是人人既有的话, if everyone has it. Okay, so the omission of the noun gives rise to this type of analysis. In the same work, 祖堂记, likewise, there's another similar, example of ge. So, for example, 是指面前狗子云明明个，三辩问是鸡是明明个，为个摩托在里许，鸡是明明个. That also anticipates the southern form, the southern conditional constructions. So for example, Chinese 嘅 or 嘅話，既然係明明嘅話，或既然係明明個話, where 嘅 here is equivalent to Mandarin de. And so in the use of de and ge in sentence final position, the idea is that when the nominal complement is omitted, de and ge can be reanalyzed as sentence final particle. So we see how sentence final de and ge are formed in clefts, in cleft constructions. With VDO and VGO, however, it's a bit different. And in VDO. All right, so we're looking at some non-equative or illogical copulars that An Yue Hashimoto has famously said. In Chinese, copular constructions need not be equative or need not be equational, and the complement can denote something else. It can denote something else that's not co-referential with the subject. For example, in these examples in the Yuan and Ming dynasty. The complement of 是, a relative clause in the form of VDO denotes something that is independent of the subject. And here the idea is that if the head noun is non-concrete or abstract, they are sort of liable to being reanalyzed. So for example, the first one, 那两个人是如此如此这么使的手段。娘原是气闹上起的病 or this example from 西游记 悟空你是哪世修来的元法 the idea has the head noun 手段病元法 etc. These are sort of abstract non-concrete entities, and so the referentiality in these relative clauses is somewhat weak. And hence, these can be reanalyzed as past time clefts. So, for example, 那两个人是如此如此这么使的手段 those two people, they manipulated in thus and so and so a way. 娘也是气闹上起的病，起的病。As for mother, she contracted illness through illness. 悟空，你是哪是修来的缘法？修来的缘法。Okay, so悟空, in which life did you obtain karma? 修来的缘法。With ge, however, all the examples of ge, seem to denote count. Or, they modify the event somehow, by denoting some kind of counting of the event. So, for example, this example from 朱子语类，叙事先说个处，叙事把做个题目，只是寻个事处。In the last one, ge here is probably an indefinite article, and you seek a point, 寻个事处。Which also applies to the second one, 叙事把做个题目 ，okay, 把做个题目。Whereas in the first one, ge here probably seems to denote aspect or some kind of modification on the event, 说个处。So ge, due to its quantificational and original count function, it's in these types of contexts, it seems to modify the event and doesn't really give rise to a reanalysis as VDO does. So I suppose if we compare the VDO and a VGO, VGO is much harder to be reanalyzed as a pastime class because ge seems to retain a quantificational meaning, and it ends up modifying either the object noun or it modifies the event. It denotes quantification on the event. With activity constructions, these are a little bit complicated, so I'll need to go through some groundwork. All right, so starting from Jim Huang's 2008 paper, where he notes that there are these differences in Chinese activity nominals. Is that we can use the 他的老师 in either object or subject position. So for example, 他当他的老师 or 他的老师当得好. And then the here are both permissible, but the here is also used in different grammatical relations. As pointed out by Tang, is that in Cantonese we only get ge or ge in object position. So, in subject position, it's not permissible. So, 佢做佢嘅老師 is absolutely fine, but 佢嘅老師做得好 is not good. The formal derivation, both Huang and subsequently developed by Tang, is they propose a light verb analysis. If I just go through this, they postulate a do functional head that denotes activity. And the verb undergoes head movement to de. And here the idea is that when de or ge occur in an object a position, so for example, 他当他的老师 or in Cantonese 佢做佢嘅老師, both Huang and Tang argue that it's possible to drop the subject and move the object activity nominal to subject a position. So this is how we get the last two steps. We get 他的老師當得好 or 佢嘅老師做得好 etc. Is that we drop the original subject, maybe 他 or 佢, and we move the object activity nominal to subject a position. Now, I've criticized this in one of my recent talks. Is that in both Mandarin and Cantonese, is that we get examples like this where the activity co-occurs with the subject, informing very long examples like this. So, 他當他的老師當得好 or in Cantonese 佢做佢嘅老師做得好. I think these examples show that there seem to be distinct light verb heads. And this is also what Hu Jianhua criticizes Huang's analysis about is, in terms of a theta a criteria, and then, there's a one-to-one correspondence between a theta role and argument. And so it's probably more natural to argue, judging from these examples, that, the agent, or the actor, 他 or 佢, and the activity nominal, 他的老师佢嘅老師, are actually merged in different A positions, and then, they can co-occur, as well as the adverbial complement. In which case, we should postulate, two distinct A heads, or two distinct allied verbs like do and done. Do introduces actor and it's specifier, whereas done introduces the activity nominal and it's specifier. In which case, the formal schemata would probably be something like this: 他当他的老师当得好, or 佢做佢嘅老師做得好, etc. Where the verb would undergo a head movement to done and then do, and then it would introduce, the activity nominal and the actor argument in the done and do, in the spec done and spec do, respectively. And here the key difference between Mandarin and Cantonese, however, is that in spec done, where the activity is merged, we can have, 他的老師 in Mandarin, but we cannot have 佢嘅老師 in Cantonese. 佢嘅老師 in Cantonese cannot be merged in spec done on its own. And that's a big difference to a Mandarin. Right, so if we look at the history of attestations, and then both de and ge, due to the differences in etymology, they select different types of nominal complements. I mean, throughout the history of de, so from the Sui Tang period onwards, there are actually numerous examples where de selects an abstract activity noun. So, for example, in the 隋唐演义，指到自己的剑和枪舞得好，自己的剑和枪舞得好。The noun here probably denotes the activity of wielding arms and weapons rather than the person's actual arms and weapons. In the second example, 他的旗子虽然下得极高，他的旗子下得极高。旗子 here probably denotes his chess playing skills rather than his actual chessboard. And in the third one, a more recent example, so 桂老师的中国话说得很好，中国话说得很好。Again, this probably denotes his skill or his ability in speaking Chinese rather than his Chinese, a concrete thing. So the here historically is attested with nouns that seem to denote activities rather than concrete actual objects. Ge, however, is a bit different. In the historical attestations of ge does seem to denote concrete referential objects. So, for example, 后面个字只对看. In Cantonese, the equivalent would be 後面嘅 or 後面個僧人嘅只對看。後面嘅後面個僧人. Again, 僧, a monk here is a real referential object. In the second one, 用如个月做嘛，用如个月. In Cantonese, this would be the possessive, 用你嘅月做咩，用你嘅月. In the third one, 但只應把定語的中間個心，中間嘅或中間個心. Again, ge here denotes a specific object that makes it quite different from the de examples above. So again, if we compare de and ge, the point is, ge being originally a classifier, it may have retained its original count and individualizing a function, in which case that makes it somewhat difficult to select activity NPs, and the NP complement of ge is regularly concrete or referential. So we can account for the impossibility of using ge in denoting activity nominals here. Right, so if we look at the intermediate dialects again, I pointed out there seems to be an isogloss, and that VGO is permitted, but 佢嘅老師 or that type of activity nominal is not. So for example, if we look at these examples again in Wu, in Xiang, and in 客家, in the previous slides I've shown you that 我是昨日買嘅票，我是前日到嘅北京，我係尋日買嘅票。These are possible, but the activity anomalous, these are not possible. So the differences between, I suppose, a VGO and low C is that in a VGO, the nominal type of phrase of a complement of the copulars, it tends to be non-referential. So 買嘅票到嘅北京買嘅票 etc. These are originally relative clauses, and here they don't seem to denote a specific or a definite object. Contrasted to activity anomalous in subject position. 我嘅there, 我嘅籃球, 我嘅ball, etc. These are referential. They are formally possessives. My food or my rice, my eating. In other words, my basketball, and my playing basketball, and my steps, my walking, etc. Activity anomalous in this form tend to be referential, whereas in clefts, VGO tends to be non-referential, and there seems to be another distinction that we can draw between these two a construction that seems to give rise to these micro variations. Right, so if we look at the Chinese nominal domain here formally represents again. Okay, so we get two distinct projections, pos that's relatively high and mod that's relatively low. Both de and ge can be merged in both. The point is, in pos being in the higher position, it probably has agreement with d in denoting referentiality, whereas mod that's relatively low doesn't necessarily have this type of agreement with d. And also with ge being originally a classifier seems to, or it may have retained its count or individualizing a function that makes it impossible to be used in pastime clefs and also in activity anomalous. And that ge tends to select real objects, real concrete objects, as opposed to abstract activities or object and relative clauses that can be reanalyzed as clefs. And similarly, in the higher position, referentiality, it also preempts its reanalysis as pastime clefs, also as activity anomalous. So we can see how in these different positions, the reanalysis of de or ge as a pastime clefs and as activity anomalous can be preempted. And we can formalize all this in terms of the formal features in the nominal domain. Right, so if I just conclude briefly. All right, so in this presentation, I've built on Tang's comparison between Cantonese ge and Mandarin de. He shows these differences using two examples. The pastime clefs where the de or ge is argued to be a verbal suffix, and also the activity nominals in subject position. My subsequent dialectal survey has shown that there seems to be an isogloss in mainland China, where there are various intermediary dialects where VGO is permitted but not activity nominals. So I think we can form an intermediary isogloss here. And the idea that's emerged from all of this, from previous research as well as my own research, is that ge is more marked than de. There are contexts such as those constructions where ge is not permitted but de is possible, and this I think can be attributed to the etymology of ge, which from classifying ge, it originally has count and individual and delimiting functions that make it harder to be reanalyzed or even impossible to be reanalyzed as pastime clefts and also as activity nominals. And I suppose this more detailed across dialectal comparison between the and ge shows that there are some micro variation in the nominal domain where adnominalisers or structural particles, the and ge can be formalized differently. Right, so if we look at the micro and parametric properties of the Chinese nominal domain, I suppose we could form something like this. In the north, we get de, and de here, it doesn't have count, and it doesn't necessarily have referentiality either. So it can be used as either VDO, or 它的老师. In the extreme south, we get the Cantonese and Taiwanese pattern where ge is both count and referential. So we cannot get either VGO or 佢嘅老師. Between these two poles, there is an intermediate dialect area where ge can be used as a verbal suffix in pastime clefs, but it cannot be used as an activity nominal in subject position. And that may be due to the fact that it has retained its original count function, but it doesn't necessarily have referentiality. So we can get VGO, but not 佢嘅老師, as you see in southern dialects. So yeah, that would be it. This would be the micro parametric properties of a Chinese nominal domain as seen in adnominalisers, de and ge. And also in L2 parametric resetting, which has been shown to have an effect on your language or dialect borrowing. We could say these features, both interpretable and uninterpretable, may influence calc transfer. So the copying of syntactic patterns, how in intermediate patterns, how in intermediate dialects, there seems to be some kind of influence from the north in permitting a VGO. But this does not carry over to activity anomalous due to the fact that activity anomalous are referential. If I just thank everyone for attending my talk today in all languages, so thank you all for coming. 多謝大家今日嚟聽我演講，同埋請大家就保持聯絡啦。同埋another way in Macau, I would like to say that muito obrigado por assistirem ao meu colóquio. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado. 多謝晒。